So I'm going to talk this morning about freedom. It really is an amazing subject, and it just tickles me to think about a prisoner writing on the subject of freedom. I think most of you know by now that we have a tremendously successful program for prisoners that's been going on for about 5 or 6 years now. And in one of the meditation courses, they are asked to study on the subject of freedom and then to answer some questions on freedom and to meditate on the whole subject of freedom. When we first began this program out, there's just no way. There's no way they're going to be able to do it. And yet, we've had some of the best meditation responses, meditation papers from the prisoners on this whole subject of freedom. Freedom to them means something completely different than freedom to us, those of us that are not, incarcerated. Usually, people who are not incarcerated think of freedom more on the physical level, freedom from relationships, freedom from financial stress, freedom from debt, and things like that. But as we have most of us have grown through the teachings, we know that freedom is more than something physical. And so I'm going to be talking about that today, about what the teachings tell us freedom is. The reason I decided to talk about freedom today is because a couple of days ago, the U.S. Celebrated the 4th of July, which is Independence Day. So I'm going to say a little something about that after looking it up in Wikipedia and condensing it down to a few sentences. During the American Revolution, the legal separation of the 13 colonies from Great Britain actually occurred July 2nd, 1776, and then Congress voted to approve a resolution of independence, declaring the U.S. finally independent from Great Britain. After voting for independence, the Congress actually did this. Our Congress voted something for the benefit of the whole country. Not that I'm being sarcastic or anything. So after voting for independence, Congress then turned its attention to the Declaration of Independence, which was written by a committee of 5, the head of which was Thomas Jefferson. They say that Thomas Jefferson was a principal author of the Declaration. Congress debated and revised the wording of the Declaration, and they finally approved it on the 4th of July. What really touched my heart and put a smile on my face was learning that a day earlier, John Adams had written to his wife, Abigail, and this is what he wrote. He wrote, "The 2nd day of July, 1776, will be the most memorable epoch in the history of America. I am apt to believe that it will be celebrated by succeeding generations as the great anniversary festival. It ought to be commemorated as the day of deliverance by solemn acts of devotion to God Almighty. It ought to be solemnized with pomp and parade, with shows, games, sports, guns, bells, bonfires, and illuminations from one end of this continent to the other, from this time forward forevermore." Isn't that amazing? So we still have the guns, but they're blank bullets, I think, when they fire them off. So here's a story, but before I give this story, as I was putting the talk together, the one point that really stood out to me, maybe just to me, but was significant about freedom. And from the teaching, it says that simplicity is a process toward freedom. So if you remember nothing else about freedom, think about that simplicity is the process toward freedom, or a process toward freedom. Now here's a nice little story that the original tale is from Rumi, and here it goes. Once upon a time, there was a man who had a bird which he kept in a cage. As he was going to the land where the bird came from, he asked a bird if there was something that he could bring back to him. What the bird really wanted more than anything else was his freedom, but the man refused. So instead, he asked the man to go to his home forest and tell the birds there of his captivity. When the man went to the forest that had been described to him, he told a wild bird the message as he had promised. Immediately, the wild bird fell to the ground senseless. The man felt most distressed, reasoning that the wild bird must have been a relative of his own bird, and that was why he had died. Upon returning home, his own bird asked if he had brought back with him news from the forest. Well, no. When I told of your captivity, your relative collapsed and died. As soon as he said this, his own bird collapsed and fell to the bottom of his cage. My goodness, thought the man, the news of his relative has killed him too. Sadly, you know what's coming. Sadly, he took the bird outside to bury it. At once, the bird revived and flew away. From a limb of a nearby tree, the bird told the man, "What you brought me was actually good news, for the message told me how I could become free through you, my captor." So with a song, he flew away, free at last. Isn't that wonderful? I just love that story. So there are actually two concepts of freedom in our minds. One is the independence from other people's impositions. But it's the other one that we are truly interested in. It's the other one that is true freedom, which can only be achieved if we are free from ourselves. If we are free from ourselves. If we aren't free from our emotions, from our thoughts, we aren't free, even though we may be the head of a large corporation, or a priest, or a minister, or a father, or a mother, or even a leader of nations. The most important purpose of the first steps of the path of the teaching is to teach us to work on ourselves. So when somebody says, I can't talk about the teaching to my relatives, I can't talk about the teachings to my boyfriend or to my children, stop and think what it is that you are saying. In fact, you are saying, I can't tell you about the teachings because you're not ready to work on yourselves yet. Or maybe you yourself, in reality, is saying, well, I'm not really ready to work on myself, so I can't tell you about the teaching yet. When we work on ourselves is how we will touch and taste and smell and love and then earn freedom. To taste and to touch and to smell and to love and to earn freedom in that way. So it's touch, taste, smell, and love. Through those 4 qualities that we begin to earn freedom. Just like acquiring knowledge is like buying furniture for our home. The home may be beautified, but the inner man does not change. Even with knowledge, you may still have depression and worries and pain. But once you start on the path of self-realization, in other words, of becoming real, then you are on the real path. You cannot meet your real self if you are only collecting knowledge and information for your mind. That doesn't help us at all. What helps us experience true freedom cannot occur. It cannot occur unless I can't talk this morning. It cannot occur unless we are transmuting and transforming our body, our emotions, and our mind. Transmuting and transforming these 3 components of our nature. The teaching says that as a human being, we are like a piece of coal. But slowly we will become radiant and turn into a fire. So too our whole being then must change. Information is just like furniture in our mind. It is a path of accumulation. And I think we can really see that in ourselves. I certainly recall back in the early years of discovering the books of the teachings. If you ever go into my home, I have more books in that home than I have furniture. Books all over the place, and I've read most of them. So imagine reading all of those words and collecting them in my mind, but realizing that knowledge, all of that knowledge, all those books did not change me. It was actually the process of working on myself that brought about, that changed me into coal, from coal to fire, so to speak. And this is what we are striving for, is this inner change. This change can start if we work on ourselves the instant we step onto this path of freedom. I was thinking back in college, the first day that I left home and hopped in my very own car, my first brand new car that Mom and Dad, they were so proud of me going to the university, so they bought this new car, and they said, "Goodbye, honey, have a good year." Well, I just took everything that I felt I needed, threw it in that car, got behind the wheel, and drove 100 miles an hour to college. Well, that was not the first step toward freedom. So, isn't that funny? I had a great first semester, and then all freedoms were taken away from me. And then I had to get down to business. And that's what the teaching is for us. When we first find all those books, and those magnificent books with beautiful covers and written by our great ones, and we just, like a sponge, begin to absorb every single idea and concept. And, we're maybe 2 hours a night, we set aside a little time to sleep. But then is when the work must begin. After we've recaptured everything that in previous lifetimes we most likely studied and learned, and now we're voraciously rereading again. And then that day comes that we realize what's next. And that's when we put ourselves on that path to freedom, and really begin to work on ourselves. So there are many things we call freedoms, but if we think clearly, we can see that they sometimes lead us into subtle slavery, like that first semester I had in college. Well, more toward the end of the semester than the beginning. It's slavery of our bodies, our emotions, and our mind. I was so busy dating and meeting people and having a great time that it wasn't till final exam week that I realized the jig's up. I have to do something here. Sometimes if we look at this more of a metaphor and look at our life realistically, some people, when they see the final exam week coming up, it's too late now to study. See, we want to study now when we're young and vivacious and feel well and have the energy and the wisdom and the intelligence to really make a difference in our lives. So if there is something within us that controls us, now is the time to wipe it away, because it is the barrier between us and the true picture of ourselves. The path of discipleship. The path of discipleship is the unwinding process that space starts. Now, if you were in class last Wednesday night, when we were talking about evolution and all the magnetic stations in space, and thinking of what constitutes space, and this is really going to make more sense to you. So I want to reread this from my notes, that the path of discipleship is the unwinding process that space starts in order to shatter all of our dogmas and doctrines and separations and divisions and man-made laws, even our stupidities and feelings and political ideas and our thought forms. This is a whole unwinding process that we started with to wind ourselves up with, right? With all of these things, our stupidities and political ideas and man-made laws and doctrines and thought forms, now space is unwinding these things so that we can begin to truly experience one humanity, one world, one brotherhood with no limitations. Now, the energy of freedom is not going to immediately lead us into happiness. It will lead us first into conflict and perhaps even into destruction. We do not find freedom by drinking and drugging, nor find it through imposing ourselves on others, our ideas and opinions and ideals and so on and so forth. We gain freedom through great pain and struggle. Real changes are made on the cross, which is called the fiery path. Release and freedom mean more communication. Now, in this case, what is communication? It's not just talking, to each other in a horizontal way, but it is vertical communication, where we begin to communicate with our inner guide, with what we call the presence, the solar angel. And then, if that's successful, we begin to communicate with senior initiates that are part of the subjective ashram, the higher ashram. And if we're successful there, then we may be fortunate to have just a moment of communication with our master. And then after a long time, maybe during a Vesak full moon, we'll have a nanosecond of communication with the planetary logos. All of that is vertical communication. Less communication is slavery. More communication is freedom, and total freedom is total communication. So you see where I'm going with this? With communication and freedom? Okay. And we want to go back to remember the unwinding process. See, to unwind that concrete, impacting density of dogma and doctrines and the separations and divisions and man-made laws and so forth, that is so corroded our concrete mind, our concrete way of thinking, that we have lost total communication with higher stations of light. Okay, so total communication means that we have built all stages of the Antakarana Bridge. You are now one with the great space. A master can move continents with his thoughts. He can move mountains. Now, this is not a fairy tale. This is a fairy tale to us because we haven't experienced it yet. But we have the faith in the teaching and faith in what self-mastery means to know that a master can move continents with his thoughts. He can move mountains. So we need to be more simple and more pure. We will leave our body, consciously leave our body. And then we will consciously leave the astral world. And then we will consciously leave the mental world and go higher and higher until we enter into our great destiny. And this is our destiny. So when we hear this popular phrase, think outside of the box, we're really thinking outside of the physical nature. Love. Love means to expand, and that's why it is so powerful. Love means to expand, not to contract. So we don't really yet grasp what a loving relationship is. When we think that love means to expand, then it means loving relationships are going to give us more freedom, greater communication. That is why love is so powerful. If you love all of your nation, then you are expanding your consciousness into all nations. Hatred is extinction. Hatred is limitation. Hatred makes us stuck and separative and far away from the unity of space. This is why we consider hatred to be a sin. But love takes us towards space. If all the stars would disappear, what would be left? Have you ever asked yourself that question? Well, the answer is space, ever-present space. But that space is conscious because its expressions are conscious. So the expressions of space would be constellations and galaxies and stars far beyond what our telescopes, our most powerful telescope, can even capture. Space is conscious. If space is the creator, then we must have a little drop of space within us. And that space must be released. But we are surrounded by so many barriers. We are not able to communicate yet with this greater space. that drop of space, has a body. It has pains, it has emotions, it has suffering. But through all of this, that space can crack the wall, the barrier to reach out to the big space. So slavery, what is slavery? Slavery is to put more walls around us. Freedom is to destroy the walls. Isn't that simple? The simplicity is the process toward freedom. Less slavery, less covering, less walls. This is what simplicity really means. Our new generation, I believe very strongly, our new generation is moving towards simplicity. We don't understand them, but this is what they are doing. They are tired of the chains our life puts around them. A caterpillar spins a cocoon around himself, and he is imprisoned. But when he has transformed himself, he is able to break through his prisons into freedom, into a new dimension of space as a beautiful butterfly. Nothing can be done without meditation. And meditation takes time. It's a discipline. And meditation is a process to create one-pointedness. One-pointedness is a very important thing in the life of a disciple. The disciple must see the goal and dedicate everything toward that goal. Then he achieves and he learns on every step of the way. And on each step, what is happening? See, he's gaining more freedom. He is overcoming the parts of himself that are the not self. See, so this is the value of true meditation. This is advanced meditation. So we are a drop of beauty and truth and goodness. And when we do these things, we are then expressing our true self. A human being is not yet his own ruler. And esotericism is based on that fact, on the fact that he must be his own ruler, but he is not yet his own ruler. Once that person starts to see that he is conditioned by outer stimuli, then his freedom starts to take shape. Unconsciously, we obey our little habits. We do things, and we imagine we are doing them. So we go to another country, like recently some of us went to Argentina. Habits don't work in Argentina. Just like habits don't work in India, habits don't work in third world countries. You know, we have to be a completely different creature as we move out of our habitual comforts. Over time, I have observed that nearly 90% of the life of humanity is in deep sleep. What does this mean? Sleep means, because I know that that's kind of offensive, but sleep means that we are controlled by outside agents. Let one person say one negative thing to you, and do you love them? Do you say thank you, bless you? Or do you go home and slam the door behind you and pick out the nearest person to you and say, you're not going to believe what they said to me. Right. Sleep means we are controlled by outside agents, but suddenly, something within us, within our discipleship, awakens, and we discover the parts of ourselves that are not real. You know, this is not the real me. And then we begin the most crucial battle in our life. The battle against our self, which may last many years. And my experience has been, it may last for 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 years, and then we're given a break. And we take a deep breath and say, all right, I'm there. And the minute we think I'm there, then the door opens up again. The next hurricane force wind comes through that door. The roof flies off. The furniture is gone, and what is left? And we have to start all over again, seemingly all over again. The great conflict is sometimes called the dark night of the soul. It is a battle of our not self against our real self. And once we start to awake, it just doesn't seem right. But that's just the way it is. That's the way life is. This is part of the unwinding process. All the hosts of the dark battle begin against us. And every deed of evil is a block on our way that must be overcome. In other words, it is like moving onto the reverse wheel of your astrological chart, when now you're forced to face everything that you have created, which has worked against your evolution. Freedom is achieved by overcoming the oppositions that are created within yourself. And this great task is done only with our own efforts. In other words, with our own hands and feet. Okay, well, I have a couple more pages to go. Let's see. Do you want me to talk for another 3 or 4 minutes? Yeah? Okay, well, let's start with this first. I actually have about another 45 minutes. I mean, how can you not talk about freedom, and forever? Okay, the Master Moria said this. He said, my warriors, guard thyself with the shield of God's will, and the divine song will ever find echo within thee. Before the deluge, when men were wedding and feasting and bargaining, Noah was already selecting the most stalwart oaks for his ark. So that's a strong message to us. Once we recognize ourselves as a soul and affirm that we are truly a soul, an immense change begins to take place within us. A great flood of light, and this can be a literal, experience or a figurative. It depends on your makeup. Where a great flood of light pours into your mind and begins to clear up the age-long obstacles, illusions, and thought forms that have kept us a slave to our past. The first effect of this change is that the energy then begins to accumulate in us. The energy of light and love and willpower begins to accumulate within us. It's no longer working against us because we're removing all those limitations, all those barriers, all those hindrances, because now we're working on ourselves, on this path of freedom. Because we're no longer going to misuse this energy, we will no longer have any leakages due to wrong thoughts or negative emotions. And therefore, we're going to continuously receive this precipitation of energy. This is why we don't want to miss a full moon or a solar festival celebration, because it's not only this greater light that comes into our chalice and precipitates throughout our entire nature and aura. Now we have the the advantage of the group's chalice. So more is pouring into us. And if we have been talking about the full moon because we have, next Sunday we'll be celebrating the Solar Festival of Cancer that Valerie's going to be doing. So if we're participating in full moon meditation in a group, then we have a greater chalice to hold that energy. And it becomes a greater resource for our service work. Finally, we become a fountain of power, a power which heals and uplifts and leads us, and we become an agent of liberation in our social and national environment. I'm going to quickly go through some of these other points here. What's happening now is that we're becoming soul conscious, no longer, self-centered. Now we're becoming soul conscious, which then finds our lives living more simplistically and more sincerely. Another effect will be a dynamic sense of communication and right human relations. This is why we want disciples to move into positions of power throughout the world. Not because they have more financial influence over the people, but they have the will of God influencing their decisions and working to help humanity evolve. The sons of men are one, and I am one with them. Another effect will be the transmutation of a person into becoming a magnetic and radioactive person. Great souls, and I'll wrap up with this. Great souls are going to appear in all the fields of human endeavor. And what are they going to do? They're going to inflame the hearts and souls of all true humanitarians throughout the world, who will then become charged the spirit of greater dedication, greater aspiration, and greater sacrifice.